Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. We're evening up the scoreboard tonight, folks, because I made a joke on our last interview episode about how Thomas Lukasik might have been the most interviewed person on The Breakdown. And Duane Bratt is coming back tonight to reclaim his throne. We're going to be talking about so much, and I'm very excited to welcome back to the program Dr. Duane Bratt. Dr. Duane Bratt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Nate. And I didn't want to come on until I watched the Lukasik interview, and then you goaded me. So I felt obligated to come on, and I was impressed that Thomas Lukasik said nice things about me, because if he dials back the clock to about 2013, it was not reciprocal. I said a lot of bad things, justifiable, but bad about Mr. Lukasik.
Well, I think that's where more seasoned politicians, public figures are able to, with the distance of time, go, yeah, maybe there was some valid criticism there, or yeah, maybe that's just part of the way that things work.
And I will give some credit to Lukasik. When he first launched this, I thought it's just Thomas being a mischief maker, right? And he toned it down, but there's some real hostility he has towards Danielle Smith, and it goes back a long time. And I got some of that out of him in an interview for one of my books. But he's put a lot of time and effort and money into this. So you feel the passion, the commitment to Canada, the life story he has, that this, okay, there's still some mischief making going on here, but he's putting his money where his mouth is.
I think like that's the sense that I got out of my conversation with him as well, is like, this is not just I'm going to poke the bear and see what happens. This is a real thing for him. And my sense is, certainly from the reaction from that episode that we've had since we aired it, that there's a lot of people who are really quite excited by it. And boy, the separatists hate that episode.
Yes, I'm sure they do.
Well, let's start with that. Let's make that our first topic, because you opened the door for me, so I'll go through it. What do you make of the Forever Canadian referendum question? Like, how seriously are you taking it? Do you think it has some legs? What are your thoughts?
I think it was a stroke of brilliance to turn the tables and to actually do it first. And understand the rules on how this operates, because I can imagine that he is going to get people, including separatists, signing this, right? Because it's going to be the only ballot question, right? And so as a result of that, he's going to have it through. You know, when we talk about the Clarity Act, one of the things they ask is a clear question. Well, this is a very clear question. So, I think it was looking back now, I think it was a really good strategy of basically turning the tables on the separatists, wording it the way you wanted to, and showing some organizational heft and smarts on how this actually operates.
Do you think he can do it? Like, I mean, I know that there's still some question, appropriately enough, about whether or not he's going to be operating under the old rules or the new rules.
Yeah, there's some real ambiguity there. We'll have to see whether he can do that. But the starting gun hasn't started yet.
No.
Right. And so, just as the APP was building up a potential petition list well in advance of the signing campaign, he's got it. But if we think about the recall of Jody Gondek, which had a lot of volunteers and was in every strip mall, they didn't even come close to that threshold. I think it was about 60,000 votes that they got, or 60,000 signatures.
Do you think it touches on the same sort of lightning in a bottle, though? I mean, like, you can not like the mayor of Calgary.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Oh no, I mean, this is an existential question, right? I mean, this is not, do we like the current mayor. It's, do we want to leave this country,
Yeah.
or do we want to give support to this country?
Do you think he like if he gets the 90-day rule, do you think he can pull it off?
The, anyone who pulls this off, that shows some real organizational strength, because this isn't just putting up a website and getting people to click. You actually have to have physical signatures right across the province. Now, the benefit is, we've seen this from polling. Who are the strongest federalists are in Edmonton and Calgary. It's easier to gather signatures in cities than it is in rural communities.
Do you think, and this is one of the things that I'm kind of wondering about because it is such a strong, I don't want to call it a branding exercise, but in some ways it is because it goes so deeply to the identity of who Albertans who live in Canada are.
Yeah,
Do you think that there's like to me, I look at the question that Danielle Smith was asked at the presser, where she was asked, "Are you going to sign the petition?" And she was like, "I know words," and
yeah.
refused to answer the question. But I wonder, like like
I don't have a problem with that sort of answer. Where I will have a problem is if they gather enough signatures and if this goes to a referendum and the premier of Alberta is asked, which way are you voting? And she comes up with the same answer. It's a secret ballot. I don't know. I'll have no. This isn't. When they had the Quebec referendum, you knew where Jacques Parizeau was voting. You knew where René Lévesque was voting. You knew where Jean Chrétien was voting. You knew where Jean Charest is voting. For that matter, the Brexit referendum, you knew where David Cameron and Nigel Farage were. You cannot this. So she can fudge. That's fine. A hypothetical, maybe we'll have a petition type of thing. It's something different if it actually goes to a ballot.
would it have cost her anything to have answered the question? Like, I take your point, but I find myself wondering, um, eh,
She's
there's
playing a very delicate dance, and that's the challenge. So no matter how you spin it, if she had said, yes, I am signing that, well, then the obvious question is, well, why are you signing that? And maybe she comes up with, I believe in direct democracy. That's why we lowered the threshold. Let's have referendums on everything. But what do the separatists think of that answer? What do the vast majority of Albertans who are not separatists think of that answer? So that's why she fudged. But if it goes beyond a petition to an actual referendum, you can't play that game anymore.
do you think like of the two choices, and Mr. Lukasik brought this up, and I giggled because apparently the two options are she can go to referendum or she can force a vote in the legislature and have the MLAs vote on the referendum question. Which one does she do?
I don't know how she goes to a vote in the legislature. I simply don't, because that would violate everything about this direct democracy stuff. That when she was Wild Rose leader, she championed this, right? The referendums and initiatives and the recalls, those weren't United Conservative Party ideas. Those were Wild Rose Party ideas. There's no way that she could do that. Um, but it sure would be interesting
Oh,
to have a vote in the legislature if it was a free and fair vote.
how do
And
you
to
get that
see where
vote?
Jason Steppen stands and where does Shane Getson stand. And yeah,
How would you even whip that vote? Like you'll all vote yes, we should stay in Alberta. Like what is it like?
yeah,
There's
yeah.
a
So
large number of the UCP base that
I,
is
I
pro-sex.
just couldn't see a scenario where that would happen. That would be too cute by half,
Fair enough.
you know. But it does show the challenge that she's got, that this is about keeping her party together. And she admits that, right? One of the great strengths and weaknesses of the premier is she gives some really honest answers sometimes to very unexpected interviewers. And so when she talks about, keeping the party together and preventing separatist parties from emerging and splitting up the UCP, I think that's a real threat. That's a real concern that she's got. And polling shows that there's no division on the NDP side. There's no division on the independent side. The division is with the UCP, where you've got a third maybe that are hardcore separatists that would leave today, tomorrow, the next day. Then another third that likes the knife at the throat strategy, that we can threaten Carney and get all these gifts. And then another group that goes, this is the stupidest idea we've ever heard of. And they're all in the same party. You know, just as you and Thomas talked about, this is the same dilemma that Kenny was facing over COVID.
Do you think that there's value in, like, there's a fun the branding exercise piece. There is, I can see value in the NDP saying, "Oh, we're so on board with this. We're gonna door knock for Thomas Lukasik, and we are so about Nenchi's gonna be Captain Canada from now on."
Yeah.
And I can also see, even though the amount of reach that they perhaps have is less, I can also see merit to the Alberta Party or the Alberta Liberals going, "Yeah, we're going to be door knocking for this too." That creates a very interesting dichotomy for me of, okay, so if the UCP, if all of the political parties in Alberta are saying, yeah, no, we're supporting this 100%, and the UCP are like, we're touring Alberta with provincial police, does that create an interesting dynamic, do you think, or is that just not ever something that's going to happen?
I mean, that's the pro separatists were trying to have a positive spin off the by-election in Olds by saying, no, you have to remember the separatists got a lot more than what the Republicans did because they voted UCP. And I think there's some truth to that.
You talked about the Alberta Prosperity Project. Let's get into their big release post. Well, actually, before we get into the big release, what do you make of their sort of response to the Lukasik referendum question being approved? Because there was a kind of a little bit of a
Oh, they're mad. they're really mad because they got snookered, right? They were talking a big game and never actually got to the hard work of filing the papers. You know, they were too busy doing their Fox News hits and having their little rallies and because this is a big story internationally, and dealing with those people, and they forgot about the referendum, and there's actually a process to do so.
Do you think they forgot, or were they just aiming for the lower bar because they knew at least that way they could had a better chance of getting there?
I don't think they anticipated what Lukasik was doing, or they underestimated him.
Okay. That gives me the opportunity to pivot to their fully costed TM.
At
Uh,
least they put something out.
that's true, but what they put out was
Fantasy and scary. So fantasy on the economic side, scary on the immigration side. Why did you even need to put that in there?
now when you say why did you need to put that in there, I'm sure that there's a lot of people who follow the show on social media who know exactly what you're talking about. But for the cheap seats, what are you talking about when you say that?
So they put a proposal on the sorts of immigrants that they would accept in a Republic of Alberta. And they created a point system based on the old Canadian immigration point system. And it was a fascinating list of things. So if you're coming from the rest of Canada, you get X amount of points. Unless you actually weren't born here, you were just naturalized, in which case you get half of those points because you're only half a Canadian if you weren't born here. And their explanation for that was not honest. It was, we want people who can drive in the snow.
No, it wasn't.
Yes. And which is fair if you're from Winnipeg. Have you seen Victoria and Vancouver when it snows?
It makes the news every year for like
yeah. So they're creating two classes. I was surprised you get extra points for credentials. So a PhD gets you a lot of points. That surprised me. I didn't think they valued that. Maybe they just meant engineers and medical doctors and things like that. You have to be healthy, but they include in health not being vaccinated for COVID. So you lose points.
Experimental mRNA
Yes,
vaccines, I
yeah,
think is the
yeah,
exact verbiage.
is the exact words. And then talking about deportation, like it's why do that? Why put that in there in the framework of your future country as opposed to what's going to be the defense policy, what's going to be the foreign policy sort of stuff. It They put it in there because separatism, and I'm going to steal one of Jacques Parizeau's lines, is it's a magic wand that solves all problems, right? And so what is driving separatism? Is it oil and gas policies? Yeah. But you scratch the surface, and it's also about COVID policies, and it's about climate change policies, and it's about immigration policies. And by immigration, I don't think they're concerned about immigration from Ireland or from Norway. Like, let's be clear, we're talking about South Asia or Africa or the Caribbean.
Is there
So
like,
they want to go back to the immigration policies of the 1920s, 1930s.
do you think that there's also like a calculated one of the things that I took away from reading that document was let's try to emulate the Trump playbook as much as we
Oh,
possibly can.
absolutely. You see that with Cam Davies and the Republican Party. And I thought that's actually a pretty nifty name. Do they mean Republican Party as in the Republic of Alberta? Or do you mean the Republican Party of the United States? The answer is both,
Yes.
right?
Which is like I found, Mr. Davies is a fascinating figure. He's got a storied history. I found his whole "I served in the military" line that he used during the by-election to be slightly disingenuous because, like, it is a legitimate question to go, yeah, but which one? It was the U.S. Marines, and
Yeah.
so like. I don't know if that quite lands the same way for me as somebody who's
Oh, but it would for a certain group of people,
probably.
right? And so I think that's why they threw the immigration stuff in there.
Is it like I was having this conversation earlier today with a friend, and we were talking about the how does this stuff work? And the idea that I've sort of been trying to make sense of is it seems like a lot of why Trump is successful is
Yeah,
because with the disparity that we're seeing across the classes, like everybody talks about the shrinking middle class, and I think there was a recent study that came out that said something like less than 5% of Calgarians make more than $100,000 a year, which is a very small number.
yeah,
And it almost seems like the ethos of all of these things is let's find all of the people who feel like they're losing, who are
yep,
tired of losing. And whatever that thing is that they're tired of losing on, we're going to include that. And we're going to say, yeah, you're not going to have to do that anymore. You're going to win on these things. Because it seems like looking at the Trump playbook and the Alberta Republican playbook, it seems like a lot of what they do is like, yeah, you've been screwed for sure. So we're going to stop that with the magic wand of
yeah.
separatism.
And the challenge that they've got is they're trying Trumpist ideas without Trump. And we've seen this in the United States. All sorts of politicians have tried to run on Trump without being Donald Trump, and they lose. There is something special about Donald Trump. There's some connection that he has got. Um, and you have to acknowledge that a Carrie Lake or a Mark Norman or a Herschel Walker or a Dr. Oz or all of those other crazy characters who've tried to do the same things and said the same crazy stuff, they don't get elected. And Cam Davies and Jeff Roth are no Donald Trump.
Why is that? Like, what is that? I mean, I could probably speculate, but you're the expert. What is Trump's X factor?
That is so hard to place. I think some of it is the image that got portrayed in The Apprentice, which was a fake show. you talk to the producers, they actually had to redo his office because it was falling apart. But it created an image of a guy in complete control who was the master of the universe, and that helped. But he's also a natural showman. He understands entertainment, and that goes before he hosted the show. That goes back to his time in the 1980s and the tabloid wars and all of that. He knows how to tell a story. He knows how to frame it in such a way. And he has success with that, that no one else can seem to do. And that's probably a good thing, because it won't carry over past him. But he's obviously got a cult of personality. There's no if, ands, or buts about that. Anyone now teaching U.S. politics has to completely change how they teach it, because this whole idea of separation of powers between Congress and president no longer exists. That, he cajoled congressmen who rail against the debt to accept a $5 trillion deficit by signing merchandise for them. He's got the Supreme Court in his back pocket. He's gotten rid of any of the guardrails that existed in the first administration. Like, we talk about trade. The trade negotiations in first term Trump were ordinary, were normal, were fairly traditional. They took a long time. There was only a couple countries. They had to go through Congress. Now he's doing a stand-up routine about, tariffs for you and tariffs for you. And so he has consolidated power, the likes of which has never occurred in the United States. And why is that? If I had the magic answer, I'm giving some suggestions, but there is something that he's got that no one else has.
I mean, I don't know if no one else has any of it, and I'm going to use this as a pivot point for the next topic that I want to hit you on, because you just talked about consolidation of power, you just talked about the removal of guardrails, and you just talked about a charismatic leader who makes people feel important. Let's talk about the Alberta Next panel.
That's a real reach.
Is it
So I dislike these tropes about every Canadian conservative is just like an American conservative.
I don't believe that.
So, that Jason Kenney was just like Donald Trump. Stephen Harper was just like George W. Bush. Brian Mulroney was just like Ronald Reagan. Doug Ford is like Trump. Danielle Smith is like Trump. Pierre Poilievre is like Trump. And you can pull different parts like that, but he's a singular guy. And there still are significant guardrails in Alberta.
But they are being, like, I believe last time you were on the show, you even said that the disassembly of guardrails.
Oh yeah, no, I still say that. They have consolidated more power provincially than any other provincial government that we have seen. My point is, the courts are still powerful. The federal government is still powerful. You don't have that in the U.S.
Point taken.
Yeah.
The emulation of the playbook, though, do you think that's a thing?
Oh, and we'll probably talk about this on a different segment, but the press conference and the press release she had with Doug Ford, for instance, yesterday. Ford talked about Trump-proofing Canada and dealing with the threat of Trump, and in the press release, the blurb must have mentioned Trump 5 times in a paragraph. Not once did that word come out of the premier's mouth, because while she may not like his tariffs, everything else she likes. So she is ideologically aligned on cracking down on transgender people, woke universities, woke media, climate change, COVID, you name it. She won't say, but I'm pretty sure if she had had a vote in November, I know which way she was voting. Um, and yeah, that is an issue. I think she greatly admires Donald Trump. I think a lot of her supporters greatly admire Donald Trump, which is why we've always had a separatism element in this province, going back to Alberta becoming a province. We haven't had an element about let's join the United States before. There's been the odd guy here and there, but no, there really is a belief in joining the U.S. now, and it's because they see what's going on in the U.S. and go, we want that too. Why can't we have an alligator Alcatraz?
I mean, do the states even have an alligator Alcatraz right now? My
Well,
understanding,
they're selling merchandise, but they're not quite there yet.
it's amphibious, is
Yeah,
what my understanding is.
yeah.
Um, but like, what? I'm still going to try to make that hard pivot to the Alberta Next piece, and I do. We are going to come.
Because he wouldn't be doing those panels. He wouldn't be putting up the videos and the surveys. He would just sign off an executive order saying, we are doing this, and then that would get challenged in court or not, right? There is a different element of Smith at play here, and this is a combination of listening to the people, but also trying to shape how they respond. So it's got the veneer of sort of direct democracy, but it's not a thumb, but a wrist, a foot, a knee, all on that scale.
Do you like? I want to explore that listening to people thing, because one of the criticisms that has been levied against the website is it is structured in such a way that, like, you have to go into that experience, that multimedia experience, with
Yeah.
a somewhat oppositional viewpoint to begin with, to come out with an oppositional viewpoint, because otherwise you get to watch like 6 to 8 minutes of this is
Can't fast forward it.
exactly. I tried.
I watched all the videos. I did all the surveys. This replicates some of what we saw with the pension plan, minus the video. They didn't have the videos with the pension plan. But with the pension plan, they did ask questions. But I was amazed when the results came out of their survey that showed, 63% of the people that went on the survey opposed the Alberta pension plan, because there was no place to do that. You actually had to write in a comment section on it. It took an awful lot of work, because the questions were, with an Alberta pension plan, do you want lower premiums, greater benefits, or both? Not, do you like this idea or not? And so they're replicating that, but now with push videos.
I
And
mean,
there is some obviously similarities with the Fair Deal panel that Jason Kenney did. There's some similarities, but there's some real critical differences. So similarity one is they were in the aftermath of an unexpected Liberal victory. 2019, it was Justin Trudeau. This time it's Mark Carney. In both cases, they pulled off ideas that had been circulating in the conservative intellectual ethos for years, and came up with those ideas. They created panels that were heavily partisan, or at least ideologically conservative. So those are the same things. What is different, I think, is the more interesting stuff. One is the premier is chairing it herself instead of bringing Preston Manning back, or some other person. Normally, premiers don't do this. They bring in the McKinnons to do a panel on university funding, or Jim Denning on pensions. To have the premier leading this is really weird. It's a stacked panel again, but there are two notable exceptions here, and that's Adam Legge, the Alberta Business Council, and Trevor Toone, the economist. And I've talked to Trevor about this, and I think Trevor is going in as an intellectual exercise. I said to him, I go, at what point I want to see you stand up and storm out of the room at one of the town halls. But that was a real coup for Smith to get those people on. And it raises a question, if the premier calls and asks you to do something like this, do you feel a responsibility to do so? And so I think that is different. We'll have to see if they get tainted by this. They're already blindsided by the videos, and they've acknowledged that. But we'll have to see. But everybody else, yeah, there's politicians all from the UCP, right, including a very newly elected UCP member. Then you go down the list of, oh, we need an Indigenous rep. Oh yeah, who likes resource development? Steve Buffalo does. So let's put him on the panel. Michael Binion is on the panel, representing the oil and gas sector. I guess Dave Yeager was busy. I don't know. But so it's a stacked panel. That's another difference. And some of the ideas are the same. Pensions, here we go again. Policing, here we go again. Equalization, here we go again. So it's some of that with some new stuff. And that new stuff, as we kind of already mentioned with the Alberta Prosperity Project, is immigration. And it's not as nasty as the APP, but it's verging on that. So those are, and commitments to referendums, but that occurred in with the 2019 Fair Deal panel. So that's probably the best comparison. And there are some real similarities, but it's those differences that I think are more important here.
Do you think it's like, here's what I struggle with, and then I have a joke I want to make. But I struggle when, governments of any stripe, to be clear, if the NDP did this, I'd be like, what are you doing? If the Liberals did this, I'd be like, what are you doing? And we got something coming for the Liberals down the way. But to say like, hey, everybody, we're going to consult and travel the province on the taxpayer's dime. I hear there's good creme brulee in Southern Alberta. When the results, the desired results, are already so clearly defined, how do Albertans engage with that kind of process in a good faith way when it seems like it's already a bad faith conversation?
Just look at the issue of the pensions. So when they did the Fair Deal panel, most of the people in those rooms all supported what the government was proposing, with the exception of pensions. And then the report came out, and it kind of said, well, Albertans are a bit undecided on this. We need to do further work on this. So they ignored it. Then Smith drags it back, and they go through the same song and dance. Pensions are incredibly unpopular, changing the pension plan. When was the last time you saw Jim Dinning? When was the last time you talked about that consultation? Because they didn't get the answer that they were looking for. So now they're taking a fourth kick at the can on this, and hoping the result is different this time. But the process is similar. Instead of coming up with a magical report that comes up with we'd get 53% of the funds, now they've got a video.
I'll be honest, I'm a little choked because normally the person that I would like go to be like, hey, what do you think of this APP thing
is on the panel
and off limits to me, I'm sure, which is frustrating. Yeah. But I do think that
but not the past writings.
Oh, don't think I'm not going to be digging through.
Yeah, because that hasn't changed. None of that has changed. The arguments are the same.
Yeah. It's Adam. What's Legge?
Adam Legge, Business Council of Alberta.
I believe the correct pronunciation is Adam Legge.
Yeah. Really?
Have to be a little childish. It was twice it happened. It was very funny.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get in trouble for that one, I'm sure. Let's talk from that, because you raised in the pre-interview, you raised a very, very good idea about doing a deep dive on each of those topics, and I'm going to take you up on that. So I don't want to dwell too much on.
There's too much to unpack here. I mean, they're talking not just what's in provincial jurisdiction, right? They have the jurisdiction to create their own pension plan. Whether that's a good idea or not, that's a different story. They can create their own police force. They can do that. Whether that's a good idea, whether they need to hedge in case there's a change in the RCMP status a decade from now, there's nothing stopping Alberta from doing those things. Where they're getting more interesting is the constitutional changes, and not just beating the equalization again, but the entire idea of fiscal transfers and giving greater tax room to the provinces away from the federal government. Talking about Senate reform, talking about House of Commons reform, all the stuff around immigration, right? You're going to need some time on those to do them proper justice.
I need to find me a legal scholar because I have questions about how somebody comes to Canada legitimately and then gets potentially denied services only in the province of Alberta. Like that, I can't even begin to wrap my head around that.
No, that just can't happen. I'm no lawyer, but mobility rights, we know from the Singh decision of the early 80s that the charter applies to everybody, no matter what your legal status in this country is. Whether you are a refugee, whether you are a landed immigrant, whether you're an illegal immigrant, it don't matter. The charter still applies. And there's a process that has to be done. And so I don't know how you can say somebody immigrated to Toronto and then 3 months later they moved to Hannah, and we're going to deny them going to school or medical care or what have you. I'd love to see the legal argument for that.
I'm interested in the legal argument against it as well.
Because there is no legal argument for it.
That's the part
and I keep hearing this, and it was in the APP as well. Why does Quebec have a special agreement? Alberta could reach a special agreement. Well, I'll tell you why Quebec does. It's about language, right? It's about preferential treatment for those that have French language skills. Immigrating to Canada should go to Quebec. But when you scratch the surface, it's about, well, they have to share Alberta values. Well, what are those? Well, we work hard. Because nowhere else in the country do people work hard. Are they going to make the case that we need specialized skills in certain sectors of the economy? That's a different argument. Then make that. But don't make some sort of values comment, because there is no special, and I'm going to get hate mail over this, special Alberta values.
I agree. I was born and raised in this province, and I went, I can't think of, having lived in rural Alberta, having lived in urban Alberta, the differences are so big that the notion,
yeah, between rural and urban, not
yeah,
between rural Alberta and rural Manitoba or rural Quebec.
yes, yeah, it's the same. Everybody in their little environment does the same thing, and
Yeah.
I think. Do you think the history argument is also important because, Quebec's history goes back a little bit farther than Alberta's as a thing in
Yeah,
broad.
that's where we get into nationhood, versus what we have here. Um, and yeah, that's when you get in, and that makes a fundamental difference that, they do have centuries and centuries and centuries of history prior to being conquered by the British that you don't have here.
Yeah.
And it used to be religion, but you don't see that anymore. But it used to be Catholicism, right? Those are fundamental differences, not this idea that we're more independent and we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we work hard, and that's the Alberta culture.
To your point about the limitations that still exist on Danielle Smith, I want to talk about get your thoughts on the injunction that we
Yeah.
saw the courts put down. So, by way of background for our audience, the Danielle Smith rolled out her horrifying, I have no problem using that word, anti-medical choice, anti-parental choice, anti-trans policies, that nobody except for a very select few asked for. and she pushed it through. She made the law. A gal, Skipping Stone, and some families said, "Oh, we don't like that." They took him to court, and they won an injunction.
Yeah.
And the courts said in the injunction, I've read the thing a few times, that there was real irreparable harm that would be caused if these policies were brought into effect. The first question that I have for you is, why isn't that enough? Like, shouldn't that be enough that the government, the people in government go, okay, we've been told that this thing that we're going to try to do is going to hurt kids by a judge. Maybe we should, revisit this. Why isn't it enough?
I think the government had to anticipate that this was a likely outcome of the legislation that they passed, that they were going to get sued and they were going to lose those suits for irreparable harm and for the fact that it's such a small number of people that it clearly is a form of discrimination. The government had to have known that this was a distinct possibility, if not high likelihood. And I'm sure the Justice Department told them that as well. So then that leads to what happens next. And this is my concern, that they will use Section 33 and use the notwithstanding clause. They're going to continue to fight, they'll appeal and all of that. But I think once that's drawn out, they will do that. And I think they're going to do that for a couple of reasons. One is there's a segment within the party that has wanted to use this tool. We're seeing provincial governments do it. The Mo government did it over pronouns. It's not been done in Alberta. It's come close. It's been threatened. It's never been done. I think they're looking for a reason to do it, and I think this is it. And they are committed to this line, and that concerns me, because that would be further discrimination. And once you do something like that, the next time and the next time and the next time, it's that much easier.
Is there a reconciliation for Smith in that, if she does invoke the notwithstanding clause? And to be clear, for anybody who's not familiar, what the notwithstanding clause is it is a legal mechanism by which provinces can say, yeah, we understand that those are charter rights, but we just don't want you to have those for a period of 5 years, and we can re-up that every 5 years or so.
Yeah, and 5 years was deliberately chosen because there'd be an election in between.
Yeah.
And the argument would be the voters would get to decide, assuming that they would decide on this particular issue that they use the notwithstanding clause in. And the federal government can do it as well. The federal government has never used it.
Does Danielle Smith have to reconcile with the fact? I mean, there's for sure, I get that there's members of the UCP that are all in on this policy, as abhorrent as it is.
Oh, there are people. So forget about this policy. There are people in the UCP caucus who want to use Section 33 over something. And in some cases, it is over jurisdiction. It's over Section 92, and they haven't figured out that doesn't apply. But they still want to use it. And it's in the Constitution, so it's a constitutional tool. It did not come out of Quebec. It came out of the prairies. Sterling Lyon in particular, but also to a lesser extent, Peter Lougheed, wanted this because they were concerned about the charter Americanizing Canada away from parliamentary supremacy. They were concerned about unelected judges. There's a legitimate argument to be had for including that in the Constitution. The problem is, once you start to operationalize that, you are, by its very definition, violating somebody's charter rights. Now, the question is whether that is justifiable or not. You could have seen a situation during COVID, and a lot of the COVID restrictions violated the charter. They didn't need to use Section 33. They were able to use Section 1, which says, in a democratic society, there are limitations on the rights. They can't use Section 1 over transgender kids, right? It's not a big enough, it's not an issue that affects the entire, it's not a plague, it's not a pandemic, it's not drunk driving, it's not all the other things that they do it on. So they can't use Section 1. So they could use Section 33. And I'm absolutely convinced that they've had those conversations. Smith was asked about that when the law passed. And she was asked about that after the initial video announcing the laws. And she hedged. But now it's an actual, right? It's not a hypothetical. And so the government has not responded. They say they're going to have to read and think about the decision. But that's where I think this is going.
I guess I just like Danielle Smith rode into power on the personal freedoms train, and it's now a situation where I can say from a statement of fact, a judge has ruled that these policies will cause irreparable harm to kids, and if Danielle Smith invokes the notwithstanding clause, she is robbing those kids of their charter rights so she can cause irreparable harm. That's not a statement of hyperbole. That's just literally what will be happening if what you're describing comes to play. How does she support?
Well, and she has tried to frame this in the terms of parental rights, but it's the parents that are fighting the government over this. So it's some parents. Now, her argument is that allowing these surgeries will create irreparable harm. But the judge ignored that. He said that's not the case. So
When the surgeries don't happen.
yeah,
Like that was the other piece that I found particularly distasteful in her latest response was she was like, we can't have kids 18 years old getting these massive mutilated surgeries going on. And I was like, you know better. Like,
yeah,
why are you doing that?
yeah.
Uh,
So, but if I was to, unfortunately, to bet my shiny loonie, I could see them using Section 33 on this because I think there's a group that they've steeled themselves up for this, and there's a group that wants this fight, and there's another group that wants to use this on something.
Find something better. I mean, I don't know that there's like a good. I'm hard pressed to think of a case where it's like take away somebody's charter rights in a good way. I don't know what that is, but um, yeah, we could do it like another hour on this, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I want to make sure that we hit on the other topics though. There's been a new, not yet, kind of sort of. I'm waiting for the third MLA party that's popped up, and this is there's some people who are looking at this going, oh, this is what I've been waiting for. There's some people who are looking at this going, oh, this is a tempest in a teapot. The PC party of Alberta is apparently making a comeback. What was your first impression when they like Guthrie kind of telegraphed it a little bit because he posted the picture of him
yeah.
wearing a t-shirt. What was your first impression when you were like, oh, this is going to be a thing?
It probably was when they went on Jesperson's show, and they publicly and announced it. There were a couple of thoughts I had. One is sort of from an intellectual level. I've done some work with my colleague Bruce Foster on the nature of conservative parties breaking apart and coming together and breaking apart and coming together. This is a phenomenon largely exclusive to the Conservative Party. We don't see this with the NDP. We don't see this with the Liberals, even though those parties have factions too. Um, and it's not exclusive to Alberta. We see it in Saskatchewan. We've just seen it in BC. Um, but it seems to be more prevalent in Alberta that this happens. So that's like, oh, here we go again. This could be interesting. Then it was listening to the premier's response, and her biggest concern seemed to be about the branding. You cannot use the Progressive Conservative name, and I'm thinking, okay, one of the two legacy parties. I'm sure that they've made arrangements with Elections Alberta that they've got that and they can't use that. Explain all of the Wild Rose parties that have emerged since 2019, all seemingly with Paul Hinman. the Wild Rose Independence Party, the Wild Rose Coalition Party, or whatever they all have the word Wild Rose in them. How is that not the same? Can you call yourself a conservative party and a progressive party, but not the two words together? Maybe they can't use Progressive Conservative Association of Alberta, which was the formal legal name. Maybe they just call themselves the Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta, right? So I found it strange that was her big sticking point, is to focus on the branding, and I think she's wrong on the branding with the examples I just gave of Wild Rose. Then I thought, how many people remember Peter Lougheed? He left office 40 years ago. Or their memories of the PC party, Alison Redford, Jim Prentice. It doesn't matter. The mythology of Lougheed, all political leaders try to drape themselves in the flag of Peter Lougheed. Alison Redford did, Danielle Smith does, Rachel Notley does, Jason Kenney does, because this was a prosperous time in Alberta. Let the good times roll, and they pick and choose which parts of the Lougheed legacy. Is it the fighting of the National Energy Program and shutting off the taps, or is it about substantially building up the healthcare system and the education system? Right? Which part do you want to focus on? Is it the creation of the Heritage Trust Fund? Is it the expansion of the oil sands? Right? You can pick and choose. So there's a reason he's called St. Peter. Everyone wants a piece of him, and it is tough though to create a party in the middle. Ask about the Alberta Party, will you?
I don't need to.
No. You were talking about how the 3 or 4 members of the Alberta Party was all going to work on this petition, though. Okay. So there's a Canadian Futures Party or centralized conservatives. It is tough to do that. Why? Where do parties emerge? On the fringes, right? The CCF was on the fringes. The Greens were on the fringes. The Reform Party was on the fringes. The Wild Rose Party was on the fringes, because you need activists. You need organizers. You need some anger to do all of that hard work. Moderation and anger don't go hand in hand. This is a challenge that they've got. But there is an opportunity here, because the issue of separation changes things. Right? Remember, I talked about how the UCP is conflicted. It's divided. It's a big tent party, but it's hugely divided on this issue. That provides an opening. And so if the UCP has moved further to the right, that creates space for another party, even if I don't believe that Scott Sinclair and Peter Guthrie are necessarily progressive conservatives. I think they took a principled stand and they got punished for it, and credit to them. But Scott Sinclair left over a budget deficit and the lack of a highway development in his riding, right? That's not necessarily a progressive policy.
Publicly. And I think that publicly, and that's
Yeah.
a piece that I think there might be some latitude with.
Yeah, and Peter Guthrie, I think, has taken a principled stand over the AHS procurement scandal. He was also one of the first to endorse Danielle Smith when she was campaigning on a Sovereignty Act. So would they fit in a progressive conservative party of the old days? Absolutely. I mean, the old days, you had Ted Morton and Dave Hancock in the same party singing Kumbaya. But it's tough to create a big tent party that's not in power. So they have huge challenges ahead of them, but there is an opportunity here. And even if they can't attract another MLA, and they might, imagine an election where the Alberta Republicans, or now it's the Alberta Prosperity Party, pulling off 10 or 15% in some ridings, and a PC party pulling off 2 or 3% in other ridings. That's not good for the UCP. And I think Smith recognizes that.
Does it cut two ways? Because like one of the things that I've been wondering, I was thinking about the last election where we had, speaking of Thomas Lukasik, standing up and saying, "Hey, I was a PC deputy premier, and I'm asking Albertans who were formerly PCs to lend the NDP their."
Either vote. Yeah.
And so I'm looking at this, and this is where I'm kind of curious about Danielle Smith's decision to like they can't have the name. I'm pretty sure they can because Elections Alberta let them reserve it, and they wouldn't have
Yeah.
done that if it was a bad name. And I'm pretty sure there was a time lapse on how long those names were locked up for. Regardless, um, I almost wonder, as much as this has the potential to hurt the UCP, does it not also have the potential to like hurt the NDP?
It could very well do that for exactly the way you said that. And bear in mind, the UCP lost the city of Calgary narrowly, but they still lost the city of Calgary. How many old PCers voted NDP grudgingly? Uh, but the NDP still has a problem because they don't have the word conservative in their name. Albertans like to vote conservative, even if we're not particularly conservative. We like low taxes and big government spending. That's not necessarily conservative, right? But we like parties that have the word conservative in them. And so, if it was the new Democratic Conservative Party, maybe they'd have an easier time of it. So yeah, we'll have to see how it all sorts itself out. And Smith keeps talking, and I can understand why. About how when the two conservative parties were fighting one another, that allowed the NDP to come up the middle. Okay. She ignores the early election and the floor crossing that she was all part of. And she also ignores 2012 when the Wild Rose Party and the Conservatives fought each other and the NDP won 4 seats, right? The NDP still got 40% of the vote in 2015. But there has become this gospel that if the Conservatives are divided, the NDP wins. And I think that's more likely now because we're in a two-party system. And so it's an old French joke after World War II about how much they loved the Germans and how much they loved the Germans as they wanted two of them. The NDP loved conservatives, and they would like, if not two conservative parties, three, four, or five conservative parties.
I'm curious, like one of the things that struck me about Smith's strong reaction to the idea of there being a new, old, whatever, progressive conservative party was that she seemed to like legitimately recoil, like, no, they can't have the name. I will not allow this to happen. And that almost seeds the ground that, yeah, they're a threat. And I almost wonder, would it have been a better approach to be like, look, we're still the United Conservative Party. We are united. These guys are the losers that got kicked out. If they want to have our scrap leftover name that we left behind, fill your boots. You're irrelevant. Wouldn't that been, is that a move that she could have or could still explore?
Possibly, but I think just stand back and watch. As I said, building party is tough. Building a moderate party is even tougher.
Okay. Um, I'm just going to take a quick look at my list here. The last topic, you're being very generous with your time, and I appreciate that. Um, the last topic, although I got to say, I feel like we're now even for the Leggy joke after the Alberta Party joke you made. So I don't feel so bad about that. It was very
Yeah.
um the you floated this idea in the pre-interview, and I want to explore it a little bit because I typically try to keep this show laser focused on provincial politics.
Yeah.
And the world of Alberta politics has now overlapped with the world of federal politics in a weird way because we have the soon to be former leader of the progressive or no out of the Canadian Conservative Party. Um, I mean, maybe former leader.
Don't ever call him a progressive conservative.
My bad.
Yeah.
Uh, maybe he joins the new party. Uh, he's running in a by-election. I'm talking about Pierre Poilievre. He's running in a by-election after not winning a seat in the federal election that we just had. And he's running in that by-election in a riding that has been like this is weird because the MP who won that riding stepped down. Somehow he seems to be circumventing the no lobbying for 5 years rule because he just got hired with a lobbying firm. There's a whole episode we could probably do on that. But
Oh, maybe he's not doing lobbying. He's just an advisor to the lobbyists.
the tail wagging the dog.
Is Jason Kenney lobbying for Bennett Jones? Is um, Brock Harrison lobbying for TC Energy? You know,
Do the same rules apply provincial? I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
yeah. No, they had to get a special exemption for Brock. I don't necessarily think for Kenny. Um, and he can say I'm dealing with matters outside of Alberta, and there's all sorts of ways around that.
Okay.
And it was the Harper government that brought that policy in.
As with all things, it
Yeah,
seems.
yeah.
What do you make of Mr. Poilievre running in Alberta? And secondary to that, the public appearances. You talked about the Doug Ford
Yeah,
press conference, and there's a
yeah.
little bit more that I want to
And the
flesh out
belt buckle.
in the new belt buckle, which struggled to put on off camera.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, you. I would like to get your thoughts on the Doug Ford press conference and the implications that it has for Pierre Poilievre. Because when I watched that press conference, my reaction was, "Oh, so he's running. He's for sure running for leader, and Danielle Smith is hedging your bets." What did you take out of the presser?
So those are two different questions, right?
Seems
Because
like that.
much of the press conference has nothing to do with Pierre Poilievre. It has to do with Doug Ford and Danielle Smith. So I'll focus on that part, and then we'll bring in Poilievre because he was at the pancake breakfast, but he didn't get up to the press conference. So two MOUs. The first one is almost exclusively about federal policies. And repealing a whole series of liberal laws, some ideas of cooperation that have been recycled. I think about the nuclear MOU. Jason Kenney signed an MOU on nuclear energy with Doug Ford and Scott Moe and Blaine Higgs already. So maybe now, and they've already done a lot of work on that MOU, so I don't know why they threw that in there. And they spent a lot less time talking about the second one, which was interprovincial trade barriers, stuff that they can actually do. I think this was a huge win for Danielle Smith. Not in a legal sense. This is still federal laws, and Smith will argue it's not, that they're all unconstitutional. That's why she's suing them. Then why do you need that for it, right? She's building a coalition to convince Carney to build pipelines. And she got the premier of the largest province in Canada on her side. That's a win. I think they did it for two very different reasons. Doug Ford emphasized that this is about Trump proofing Canada. This is about dealing with the threats of tariffs. He's concerned about Line 5 that goes through the U.S. back into Canada, and the Michigan governor Gretchen Whitmer is really unhappy with that pipe and wants to get rid of it. The courts have said that's federal jurisdiction. I think Ford's concerned that some morning Trump is going to Truth Social. We're going to shut off the oil in the underneath Lake Superior, right? And who knows? That could very well happen. So that is where Ford is coming from here. Where Smith is coming from is building allies against Mark Carney. And she did that at the Western Premiers meeting. And so she's playing good cop, bad cop. She's playing the good cop by getting Moe and getting Wap Canoe and getting Doug Ford in line. And the bad cop saying, and if you don't like us, we've got these lunatics over here that are separating. Please give us something. It would have been more convincing if she had an MOU with David Eby. After all, the pipeline to Northwest BC, that's more significant. That's much more likely to happen, and you're not seeing BC supporting that. So I think this was a real coup for Smith. And it's also a bit of Back to the Future. There was a very close relationship between Kenney and Ford. They launched the carbon tax lawsuit together against the federal government. He showed up to the Stampede breakfast, flipped pancakes with Jason Kenney too. And then things got really cold during the federal election. And in fact, there were Alberta conservatives who said, Doug Ford is just a liberal. He's nice to Chrystia Freeland. He's nice to Mark Carney. Look at what Corey Tenake said about Jenny Byrne. And they weren't on very good speaking terms. And now it looks like they've kissed and made up.
Why isn't Smith celebrating it more? I mean, like, I know that it's photo op season during the Stampede and everything. And for the record, we're recording this on July 8th. But it seems like she has, like, if this is a legitimate win, it hasn't been touted.
I thought she touted it pretty good. I mean, they obviously negotiated this in advance, right? This was the opportunity. They've got the front page. I look at just at the Calgary Herald today, front page photo of Smith, Scott Moe, and Doug Ford. They didn't need Moe in the MOU. They know where he stands. And then there was at least 3 articles in the Herald, Braid, Varco, the news piece, all on this. I know I did a ton of media on this yesterday,
Okay.
not just locally, but nationally. Like, this was a big deal. I was on CBC News Network. They covered the press conference. So yeah, it's a big win for her, I think.
Okay. How much of it was, and I mean, you talked about the photo with Danielle Smith
Yeah.
and Scott Moe and Doug Ford. There is a name that was left out of there of a fairly higher profile conservative that was in town. How much of that, like, am I reading it wrong? Because Doug Ford really did put on his Captain Canada cape where he was like, we got to protect Canada.
Well, and this was the other thing. It wasn't just the election things were cold. There was a very different approach that Ford was taking towards the Trump tariffs that Smith was, and they were at loggerheads. So, as I said, they got into common ground, but for very different reasons.
Okay. Do you think was it a task, like a soft launch?
There's been a lot of speculation about whether Ford is running. Again, I'd like to see how good his French is. It's not a skill you can start to learn in your 50s. Mark Carney was a bureaucrat for a lot of years in Ottawa, taking French language lessons. He didn't just show up this summer, or in the spring and start to work on it. So that's one challenge. The other is there has not been a premier to become Prime Minister of Canada since the 19th century, and there's a reason for that. That is, premiers are so focused on their province. Provinces have so much power that it's tough to distance themselves. Probably Robert Stanfield was the closest. He almost won the 72 election, but he was also premier of Nova Scotia, right? Not one of the big provinces. And so, yeah, Doug Ford has won 3 straight majority governments. That's pretty big. You have to win Ontario to form government. That's pretty big. How is he going to play in Saskatchewan and Alberta, given some of the hostility that I mentioned? Don Braid's column today was, you can't trust Doug Ford, because he's Ontario premier, and he actually bashed Bill Davis in the process. That I thought was a bit unfair, because Bill Davis pumped a lot of money into the oil sands in the mid 1970s. So, people are always looking for that's got to be the answer, and I'm not sure that's where Ford is going. Because if Ford wanted to, I think he could push Pierre Poilievre out if that's something he really wanted to do. I think Poilievre is very vulnerable, and what is missing is someone who wants that job. And Ford could do that if he wanted to. I don't know if he does.
So, do you think Mr. Poilievre, assuming that he wins the by-election, he's going to win the by-election?
Oh, yes. Yeah, the by-election, what is interesting about the by-election is not the result. I'm going to sit here and make a prediction, Nate, that Pierre Poilievre's going to win. So you want to write that down. You could put it in pen. The two most interesting things about it is, one, the very fact he's having to do it, and where he's doing it, right? It is not uncommon for leaders that don't have a seat to go to a safe riding. Brian Mulroney first becomes leader of the PCs. He goes into Central Nova, and Elmer MacKay leaves his spot for him. There was an open seat in Calgary Elbow. Danielle Smith said, "Nah, I'm going to go to Brooks Medicine Hat." Ed Stelmach lost his seat in Edmonton in 1989. He ran in Stettler, which, for a trivia point, is in the current riding of Battle River Crowfoot. But it's one thing to do that when you're out of you're brand new, like Smith or Mulroney. It's another when you've lost your seat, but you're the government. In the case of Don Getty, it's another when you've lost the election and your own seat, and then you go back to the safest riding. It's got to be a bit humiliating for Pierre Poilievre to spend his summer campaigning there, because he used to be able to say, I'm an Albertan who represents an Ottawa riding, right, with a French name, right? Now he can't do that. Now he's back home in Alberta, and I think that's got to sting a bit for him. The other interesting part is how the campaign is going to go. First, it's not an easy riding to campaign in. Like, it's massive geographically. Wainwright and Camrose in the north and Drumheller in the south, all the way to the Saskatchewan border. It's not easy to get to. You got to fly into Edmonton and then drive, or fly into Calgary and drive. But if that wasn't enough, it's under the specter of Alberta separatism and Alberta Next. And he is going to be hounded, because the press love a story like this. Wherever he goes, asking questions. Do you support Alberta independence? Well, you're the national leader, but you're also running in a riding that might have a lot of supporters of Alberta independence. That's going to be easy for him. He'll do the, yes, I want a united Canada, but look at all these bad things that Carney's doing. Okay. Then you get into the more difficult questions. What do you think of Senate reform? What do you think about fiscal transfers? What do you think about a pension plan? What do you think about immigration policy in Alberta? He can't duck those. And that's going to be hard for him, because he is trying to win a seat, and he is also preparing for a leadership review, which he also scheduled for Calgary.
I had not realized that.
Yes, in January. It's in Calgary.
Do you think he can't duck it, though? I mean, like, this is a dude who ate an apple for 3 minutes.
It's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough summer. We'll see how he manages. But it's going to be, eating an apple is great amongst the elite media, even though that was a local reporter, not quite, elite media. But what do you do when you're door knocking? What do you do at a town hall? When you're just your average conservative supporter says, we got to get rid of this equalization and screw Quebec. What's your view on that, Pierre?
What's the harm in him lying? Because he called
lying to who? Lying to who?
The Conservatives. I mean, there's video of him door knocking during the federal election where he was like, "Oh, that Justin Trudeau, we got to stop him and his Marxist communist ways." And it was like, that's not real, but he said it.
Yeah, but they believe, enough conservatives believe that.
Yeah. So if he's out,
so what's the answer that you go? You go, yeah, we're going to have a Poilievre government will amend the Constitution to get rid of equalization. Is he going to say that?
Sure, he's got 5 years.
And how well do you think that's going to play in the province of Quebec? Bear in mind, all of Smith's attacks, and in fact, I would argue most of the attacks on equalization are not aimed at New Brunswick. They're not aimed at PEI. It's all about Quebec.
Yeah.
Right? Do you want to be a conservative party and basically say, yeah, we don't want to win any seats in the province of Quebec.
Okay.
Stephen Harper was able to form government, but he had a toehold in Quebec. He had those 8 to 10 seats, not enough to form, not enough, you're still the third party in Quebec, but it's not like the old days before the bloc emerged, where you have an election and Pierre Trudeau's already got 75 seats lined up because the Conservatives will win 1 or 0.
Do you think he has to do the town halls? Like, does the allure of wow, we're getting into federal politics. This is weird. But does the allure of we could have the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada
Okay,
be representing us?
let's go back to Ottawa Carleton. I know it's away from Alberta. The two elections that matter the most for Pierre Poilievre is 2004 and 2025. 2004, he knocked off a Liberal cabinet minister, and he knocked him off by working his ass off, going door to door over and over again for well over a year. And he saw that Pratt was vulnerable and could beat him. 2025, I don't think he stepped foot in his riding. And Fanjoy did the exact same thing to Poilievre that Poilievre did to Pratt. He spent 2 years walking the doors and basically saying, yeah, he's the leader of the official opposition, but he's not representing you. So what does Pierre Poilievre do in Battle River Crowfoot? Does he do the 2004 strategy or does he do the 2025 strategy? He's got to do the 2004 strategy. So basically saying, my name is there. I've already made an appearance. I don't need to come back. You'll never see me again. Vote Conservative. I think that's very dangerous for him. But it's been an awkward scene for Pierre Poilievre. Like, okay, so this takes us back to the press conference with Doug Ford. Poilievre was at the breakfast too, but he doesn't get into the photo. He's not in the press conference. I joked off camera about he's on the horse in the parade. And so for those outside of Calgary, all politicians are in the parade. But there's two categories of politicians. There's the big important ones that get to ride a horse. The mayor gets to ride a horse. The premier gets to ride a horse. Pierre Poilievre was on a horse. And then there's cattle cars with all the councillors and the MPs and the MLAs. How does he get on a horse? Right? When he is not an elected official. And how does his wife get on a horse? Now, yes, he's still the leader of the official opposition. He's still the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. He's not the official opposition leader, and he's not an MP. Is that enough to get on a horse? I guess so, but it's been a tough. He had a funner time in 2024 Stampede than he did in 2025 Stampede.
Well,
and I will say, I do a lot of political Stampede at a lot of political events, and there's a lot of Conservatives who are saying not very nice things about Pierre Poilievre, and they're saying them to people like me, but they're saying it privately. Nobody has come in public.
How long does that last?
Well, one is if Doug Ford announces he wants to run or is considering running or doesn't even say a word, but there's signs of organization and mobilization. Or come fall, the newly elected Pierre Poilievre, member for Battle River Crowfoot, now the official opposition leader, and he's still trailing Carney by 25 points on who's the best prime minister. And they're still trailing the Liberals by 5 to 6 points. If that is still occurring into November, those are danger signs for Pierre Poilievre.
Back to the provincial politics.
Yeah.
We talked about a lot. Definitely have to get into the Alberta Next panel more at a later date. What is there anything that we talked aside from what we talked about here tonight that you're going to be paying particularly close attention to in provincial politics?
Well, the Alberta Next is going to take a lot of oxygen over the summer by design. And it will be very curious to see how many referendums questions we get. And so if you just had a referendum on pensions, it would fail. That's why we haven't had one. But if you have a scaffolding of referendum questions, and the final one is, do you want an independent country? And people go, well, I don't want to separate, but I'm still mad about something and we need to send a message. Maybe now I'll say yes to pensions or say yes to policing. We've already had the referendum on equalization. I don't know how you redo that and say, but this time we really mean it. I think that's going to be the dog and pony show that's going to take up much of the summer and early fall.
How does Nenshi punch through that?
I know Lisa Young recommended he have his own panel looking at building instead of destroying. I don't know. He's had some trouble too. Now he's in the legislature. I will say, I found it refreshing when Mark Carney said no games and called a by-election to allow Pierre Poilievre to enter almost as quickly as possible. Danielle Smith did not do the same thing in Alberta. So yeah, Nenshi's having trouble, but people don't necessarily elect governments; they toss them out, and he's got to watch it. What is occurring?
My last question. I lied. I always do that. One more question, and I swear I'll let you go. You talked earlier. You opened up the conversation by mentioning how you were doing some work with somebody about Mr. Lukasiuk, asking him some questions about a certain current premier. You have a tendency of writing these books, sir. I'm
Yes,
curious, is there a Danny book coming?
there is a Danny book coming. We actually have an author's workshop scheduled for late August. We have a lot of really interesting contributors, many of which you've had on your show, from Jared Wesley to Lisa Young to Trevor Toom to myself. We've had to bring in people from outside the province. As Lisa says, we need help here. And so we've always had a chapter comparing sort of an outside voice. So the Orange Chinook, it was Rachel Notley and Bob Ray. And that we had Graham White right out of Ontario. And then the Blue Storm, it was a comparison of Jason Kenney and Doug Ford. And we had Jonathan Malloy out of Carleton write that. This will be a comparison, not necessarily between Scott Moe and Danielle Smith, but more Saskatchewan and Alberta. And some of the, because I think Saskatchewan is emerging very similar to Alberta. The last election results almost mirrored what we saw here. And we've got Chuck Smith out of the University of Saskatchewan writing that. So there's lots of interesting chapters that are being proposed. We are going to look at separatism, and and in that one, we're actually bringing in a couple Quebec scholars to look at the similarities and differences with the Quebec referendums. My chapter is looking at Danielle Smith and Trump, and we'll see how that goes. That fits into my Canadian foreign policy hat and my Alberta Politics hat. Obviously, a lot on healthcare. There is a chapter on HS procurement. There is a chapter on the restructuring. There is a chapter on transgender. We wanted, and we're still hoping for, a chapter on addictions. We haven't been able to find anybody, so we're still working on that.
Are you going to get Dr. Toom to do like a retroactive on the Alberta Next panel? Please say yes.
No, we've already got him committed to the finances. So basically an update of what he wrote in the Blue Storm, of what Ron Kneebone wrote, because now we're in deficit territory, right? And so the impact of tariffs and things like that. So no, not on Alberta Next.
Oh, darn it. There's probably an NDA anyways.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say, Dr. Bratt? Thank you again.
We still need a title for the book, by the way, because we've tried to have weather and color, and that seems to be hard now. I've gone to various events. People have proposed ideas. One suggested rainbow because that would be the color and a weather. And I said, there's no way we can call it rainbow.
Yeah, I don't see that being well
Yeah,
received.
so we're still working on that. So yeah, there's some really interesting things that are coming across here.
I would propose a hurricane or perhaps a tornado for your weather choice. Do it that way.
Yes, yeah, we thought about that. I had a suggestion about the Alberta Clipper. Maybe just go with weather because there's only so much color you can throw in after you've gone from orange to blue.
What do you get when you put orange and blue together?
Brown? I don't know.
I don't know either. I'm colorblind, so color theory is not my strong point.
Yeah, maybe purple. Yeah, so no, we're excited by that.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Brett, thank you so much for taking the time to chat tonight. I really appreciate it, and I love the Alberta Party joke. I'm looking.
Better than the Adam Lake one.
I thought, really, it was visual. Like I know the
Yeah,
audio
but
podcast is
if
gonna
you're
be like, what?
listening to the podcast, you're not going to get it.
Okay, if you're listening to the podcast, I scooched off screen. It was
Yeah.
very clever, and I'm very proud of that joke. I'll
Yeah.
probably make a clip of it. Dr. Bratt, thank you so much for taking the time to chat tonight.
Okay, we'll see you, Nate.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case, maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.